Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We do still have a number of people joining, so we will get started in about 1 minute. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talk about the latest updates on the various legislation related to hearing aids. I'm Chelsea Treseder with Pivot Hearing, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Pivot, we are the leading practice development services group, and we exist to help hearing care professionals grow their practices with fresh, relevant mentoring and execution. Our team is composed of audiologists, hearing instrument specialists, and business people, and our work is based on the real-world success we have in our own multi-location practice here in the North Bay area of San Francisco, along with the hundreds of other practices we work with across the US and Canada. This webinar is meant to be a brief update about what we know around the OTC hearing aid and possible expansion of Medicare to include hearing aids. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us. Today's presentation will be delivered by Will Dials, hearing instrument specialist and practice consultant with Pivot Hearing. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As we go, please feel free to drop any questions or comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom interface, and we're hoping to have time at the end to answer those. And with that, I will turn it over to Will.
Okay, thanks, Chelsea. And yeah, so the main topics that have the potential of changing things in our industry from a legislative perspective are certainly, OTC and Medicare expansion. As Chelsea mentioned, at Pivot Hearing, we work with private practices all over the country. And as practice owners ourselves, we pay very close attention to developments on the legislative front so that we can be prepared, as possible for what is coming next. And just a little disclaimer, all of this information is changing fairly rapidly, and nothing is set in stone at this point. So as developments take place and we learn more, we'll make sure to keep you all updated. And in fact, we expect that this is the first webinar in a series over the coming months as things unfold. So it's funny, if we had done this webinar a few weeks back, I think the order of these two items in terms of importance would have likely been flipped. As many of you are aware, we received some long-awaited info from the FDA in terms of the regulatory framework around OTC. So we'll spend a little more time going over the details of OTC on this particular webinar, and in particular, kind of how it impacts those of us that are in private practice. And Medicare expansion, specifically adding hearing aid coverage to Medicare, is something that's been discussed for years. And as recently as a few weeks ago, it was looking pretty likely to occur. But if you've been watching the news lately, it's really not the case, and things are very unclear at this point in terms of getting a deal done. Okay, so some brief background on OTC. The bill was introduced in March of 2017 and signed into law of August of that year. I'll just read a couple of excerpts, with some of the key components of the bill. So this bill amends the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to require the FDA to categorize certain hearing aids as over-the-counter hearing aids and issue regulations regarding those hearing aids. The regulations for over-the-counter hearing aids must provide reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy, establish output limits and labeling requirements, and describe the requirements for the sale of hearing aids in person, by mail, or online without a prescription. It also says that it is intended to be used by adults over the age of 18 to compensate for perceived mild to moderate hearing impairment. And more recently, President Biden issued an executive order in July that added a little pressure, to this process. In this executive order, which had a whole bunch of other things, but it included this language, which was to promote the wide availability of low-cost hearing aids not later than 120 days after the date of this order, published for notice and comment a proposed rule on over-the-counter hearing aids as called for by Section 709 of the FDA Reauthorization Act. Okay, so that's just a little background on OTC. And another important piece of information around this issue, I think, is the consensus statement that was released by AAA, ADA, IHS, and ASHA back in August of 2018. So they put together a document that included 5 recommendations to the FDA in terms of how to define and regulate these products. So we'll go through some of the key important information here. So recommendation 1 was to establish product requirements for these OTC devices, which, as the bill lays out, are intended for those with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. So based on this information, the statement recommended a maximum output level not to exceed 110 dB. Recommendations 2 and 3 make some suggestions about what should be called out on the outside and the inside package labeling of these devices. On the outside of the package, they recommended including language around, strongly recommending a consultation with a hearing healthcare professional, and also some red flag issues to look out for when you might want to seek medical treatment. On the inside, they wanted to make clear that these products are intended for people only over the age of 18 and not to be worn for more than 12 hours per day if they are causing any sort of discomfort. Recommendation 4 asks the FDA to name this new category of hearing aids, as they are directed to do by the bill, as self-fit over-the-counter hearing devices. And recommendation 5 asks the FDA to establish some strong consumer protection laws around return policies, refunds, and those types of things. So now that we've finally received the proposed regulatory guidelines from the FDA last week, it's interesting to see how the proposal is, in some ways in line with the consensus statement, but also how it differs. It came in a 114-page document, so we'll just spend a little time highlighting the key takeaways here. So as directed by the bill, the FDA is proposing to establish a new regulatory category for OTC hearing aids to improve access to hearing aid technology for Americans. So that's kind of what they're intending to do with this bill. And in the document, the name they are using for this new category is OTC hearing aids. And this is to differentiate from the professionally fit hearing aids, which they are calling prescription hearing aids. So this is not exactly as is recommended in the consensus statement in terms of what to call these devices, but not too far off. Perhaps the most important and contentious issue here is setting the maximum output for these devices. And this is also where the proposal differs the most from the consensus statement. So the FDA is recommending a maximum output of up to 120 dB for products that have user-controlled volume and input-controlled compression, and 115 dB for those that do not. So that's fairly significant difference from the 110 that was recommended by the consensus statement. So I think that's probably where the difference is the most stark. In terms of the packaging requirements, here are a few that were listed in the 114-page document, and more or less, I think they fall in line with what the consensus statement was recommending. So not for users younger than 18 years of age, and recommendations that these products are intended for those with symptoms of perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. They will list considerations for when to seek a consultation with a hearing healthcare provider on the outside packaging. So not exactly a strong recommendation as was requested in the consensus statement, but along those lines. And also they're going to list some red flags to look out for in terms of when medical care might be needed. So those are kind of the high level, regulatory guidelines that came out of that document. So here is just a little timeline that was produced by HIA, and this was created before the proposal was released last week. So some of these dates don't quite add up, but I still think it's helpful to look at this in terms of understanding what comes next. So to back up just a little, the unified agenda in the spring included the issue of defining OTC regulations. And as we talked about earlier, President Biden issued an executive order kind of pushing things along. And until last week, we were waiting on the proposed regulations from the FDA, which brings us to where we are now, which is the comment period. So the FDA will now accept comments from the public for 60 days. So I've heard 90 days and 60 days. So it's a little unclear as to how long the comment period is, but 60 is probably good to be safe. And the FDA will then take those comments and will have 180 days to publish their final rule in the Federal Register, which will include any changes that they make based on the comments, or at a minimum, proof of consideration of the comments that they received. 30 days later, the rule will be published in the Federal Register, which puts us into August or maybe sometime in the fall of 2022 in terms of when we can expect to see these products on the market. Okay, so what does this mean for those of us in private practice? With a lot of unknowns out there, I think it's safe to assume that OTC represents one more competitive threat, along the lines of managed care, big box, online, and among others. And are there any potential benefits here? Maybe it's possible that OTC devices will help bring patients into the market a little earlier than they otherwise would. In terms of negatives, I think the obvious concern here is the cannibalization of existing hearing aid sales. So sales that would typically happen in the private practice context, shifting to an over-the-counter fitting and sale is obviously not a great thing for those of us in private practice. It's hard to know exactly how this will all pan out, but here are just a few things to keep an eye on as we move forward. What's in the final FDA rules? Does the output limit perhaps get reduced based on comments received? Are there any other issues that are raised in the comment period that could impact the final rules as well? How will the manufacturers respond? Will we see big six branded products available over the counter? And if so, how will they be different from what we are fitting our patients today in the private practice setting? And then, how will insurance companies respond? Really hard to say at this point, but definitely something to look out for. Okay, so now let's move on to talk a little bit about Medicare expansion. So expanding Medicare to cover hearing, dental, and vision has been discussed for years, and for whatever reason, it seems like a challenging thing to accomplish politically. But with Democratic majorities in both chambers, along with the presidency, and a seeming appetite amongst the general public for expanding Medicare, this looked like something of a done deal, not too long ago. But given everything we've seen on the news lately, Medicare expansion appears fairly unlikely. Although I just read a Yahoo Finance article literally minutes before going live this morning that suggests that Medicare expansion of hearing care will be included in some theoretical bill that might have support amongst the Democrats in Congress. So hard to say at this point. The original budget that was passed by the House, though, before being sent over to the Senate, included language about expanding Medicare to cover hearing, vision, and dental. And to review this, I've just kind of called out some of the language from the Ways and Means Committee to get an idea of what Medicare hearing aid coverage might look like. So this is language straight from the Ways and Means Committee. And coverage of hearing aids is defined as inclusion of hearing aids as prosthetic devices. So this is a really important distinction, as the other category that was being discussed for hearing aids was durable medical equipment. Now, this might not sound like much of a difference, but that distinction could actually be quite meaningful. So if hearing aids are considered prosthetic devices, hearing healthcare providers would be able to order products from manufacturers, then resell them to Medicare patients and bill Medicare for the patient's benefit. If it were to go the way of durable medical equipment, then the federal government would become the purchaser of these products and would be reimbursing providers based on a fee schedule for their services. So durable medical equipment would reflect a pretty radical change from the status quo and would likely not be like a great outcome for those of us in private practice. Some other key language here regarding eligibility is that the coverage would only apply to individuals diagnosed with profound or severe hearing loss. So how this is defined is unclear. So it's hard to say, but our sources say that the number that 61 dB pure tone average, or maybe even 71 dB pure tone average, were being discussed as ways to define severe, profound, or severe hearing loss in this context. So the question is, if something like this were to move forward, how many patients would actually be eligible for this benefit? Because that's a pretty significant degree of hearing loss. Another interesting piece that's in the bill is that they specifically precludes OTC hearing aids. So it says right in here, not more than once during a 5-year period, only for types of such hearing aids that are not over-the-counter hearing aids. So I just thought that was interesting. And finally, the language suggests that this benefit, might only be available when used through an audiologist, as it says here, with written order of a physician or qualified audiologist, implying that perhaps this benefit would not be, you would not be able to use this or bill this as a hearing aid dispenser. So it's unclear if leaving out hearing aid dispensers was an oversight or intentional, but based on some of the trends that we're seeing in healthcare in general, with more healthcare being provided by nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, it seems unlikely that hearing aid dispensers would be excluded should the bill move forward. Okay, so as we've discussed here, Medicare expansion is not looking all that likely at the moment. Although, who knows based on some of the stuff going on in Congress as we speak. And most of this is actually is due to the opposition from one senator, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who's a Democrat, but a very moderate one. And at a CNN town hall recently, President Biden said as much. He described it as a reach, the idea of expanding Medicare. And there was a New York Times article that came out last week by, White House correspondent Michael Shear, who stated that seniors won't get free dental, hearing, and vision coverage from Medicare. It's a direct quote from him. And, it is possible that we see a watered down version of hearing aid coverage when the budget is passed. And there are discussions going on in Congress right now around an $800 voucher that could potentially be used for dental or hearing. So perhaps that, it's just pure speculation, but perhaps that is what is, in this theoretical framework of an agreed upon bill. Perhaps it's something like that. It's hard to know, exactly what will happen, but all signs point to Medicare expansion not happening, at least probably not this year. Okay, and so what does this mean for private practice? Medicare expansion looking, unsure. There probably isn't any imminent change on the horizon. But even if it doesn't come through this year, you can count on Medicare expansion being a hotly debated issue in budgets to come. And we've probably not heard the last of this concept. There seems to be political appetite for it amongst the public. And it appears that, the opposition really comes down to essentially one person in Congress. So expect it to be on the agenda in the future. And at some point, it will probably become reality. In terms of the potential benefits, this could really help private practice by increasing access to hearing care for Medicare beneficiaries. I mean, it'll all come down to the details, but there's a potential that could increase the number of patients we'd be able to see in a private practice context. And as far as the negatives go, it's just really unclear at this time with so many unknowns. It's hard to say what could potentially be negative about this for private practices. And some things to keep an eye on as we move forward. It's all going to come down to the details of how the coverage is set up. So how hearing aids are classified, prosthetics versus durable medical equipment, the type of coverage. Will it be a flat benefit amount? Will patients be able to buy up and upgrade to technology? Who is eligible for the coverage, and how is the hearing loss level defined? So a lot of details to pay attention to when we talk about Medicare covering hearing aids. And of course, the political climate of the country will be important. There are midterms right around the corner, and depending on which way things go politically could have a major impact on this type of legislation or really any other that's being discussed and debated in Congress currently. So we'll have to just keep an eye on that. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chelsea for some Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Will. Before we jump into the Q&A, I did want to share our philosophy, which is that when private practices put patient care and experience at the center and build fortified business models around that, they will succeed, no matter the challenges that arise. Start with patient care and business results will follow. So as we wrap up, I wanted to read our mission statement, which is Pivot Hearing stands with private practices because we believe they provide the best patient care, and it is our vision to successfully fortify those practices to thrive in their local markets. The key to your success now and in the future is to develop and communicate compelling reasons why patients should choose you over other competitive alternatives in the market, whether those alternatives are big box stores, managed care entities, or even things that come about as a result of government legislation. Pivot Hearing develops impactful, forward-thinking, real-world tools to help private practices compete. And we don't just bring ideas, we also deliver lightning-fast execution so your practice can stay one step ahead. We offer practice development services in 3 major categories. Offense, which is how we help you acquire new patients. Defense, the ways in which we help you nurture and engage your existing patient database, as well as defend against any and all competitive threats. And coaching, which is all of the other practice management support we deliver to you and your team. As fellow practice owners and seasoned consultants, nobody offers better thinking around what it's going to take for private practices to succeed in the near, medium, and long term. Nobody executes as quickly on the database decisions we help you make, so things get done well, quickly, and move your business forward. The beautiful thing about our model is that working with Pivot Hearing likely won't cost you anything, and it may even save you money. We offer extremely competitive hearing aid pricing. You retain manufacturer perks and benefits that you already have, and there are no contracts, commitments, or minimums. We'd love the chance to get to know you, your practice, and your market better to see if we can support you and help you grow. So you'll be receiving an email following this event that includes a link where you can schedule a one-on-one meeting with our team. And with that, I will see if we have any questions that have come in. We have one question here. Okay. Can the difference between prosthetic versus DME be clarified? Do you want to share what you know about that, Will?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the way it's been explained to me in the research I've done, a prosthetic it would be more like a knee replacement, and a durable medical equipment would be like an insulin pump. So the actual legal definition of what makes them different is I think it's pretty murky, but I think that durable medical equipment in the Medicare context is the products themselves are purchased by the federal government, and then they are, at the place where the patient's getting the care, that provider's getting paid a fee for their service. If it's a prosthetic, that provider gets to buy the product that they're, either, whether it's a surgical piece or something like that, they get to buy that and then, charge the patient and bill the patient's Medicare. And yeah, so that's more or less our understanding of that distinction.
Okay, great. Another question here, and I don't know that we'll have the answer to this, but I'll ask it. Which manufacturers have you heard that are developing OTC devices?
I have not heard of anything specifically. Some of the manufacturers have acquired some more consumer-oriented brands, so just pure speculation. But I haven't heard anything specific, so I don't want to say anything at this point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here's another question. Help me understand why all of the professional organizations in audiology and the leaders of the profession are fighting for the Medicare bill.
I don't know. So anything I say would be speculation, but I would assume that the Medicare expansion has the potential to be overwhelmingly, I think, positive, for those of us in private practice, because it would increase our ability to see more patients, and bring, expand access to hearing care, which is a good thing. Generally. Now, of course, if the details of it make it so that our business models are not as profitable, and there's potential problems along the way, but I just think that making hearing care more available and affordable for patients in a private practice context is good, generally.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Give everybody just a second. And then I'll also just mention that if you do have a question that you haven't asked, or it comes to you later, or we don't get to it this morning, we will be sending you an email and follow up here, and we are happy to take your questions individually at a later time as well. Okay, here's a question. When they say prescription hearing aids, does that mean a doctor can do a script or must be an audiologist? I think you can define how they're using that term, right, Will?
Yeah, so I think the prescription hearing aids is the language the FDA is using to describe professionally fit hearing aids. I don't think it necessarily has to do with the doctor or the. I just think it's to differentiate from over the counter. It's a hearing aid that's being fit by a licensed professional, whether that's an audiologist or a hearing aid dispenser.
Okay, great. Just looking, we have a number of comments here. I'm trying to see which ones are actually questions. Somebody's asking about a recording of this. Yes, we have recorded this webinar, so we can make that available. Okay, great. All right, well, I think that's all the questions we have. We have a number of comments that the people have mentioned. So thank you guys for participating and for engaging with us this morning. And We will be following up with everyone. And if you have any other questions, you can reach us at any time on our website, pivothearing.com, email address info@pivothearing.com. And we are happy to have one-on-one conversations or answer questions. And then I think Will may have mentioned this briefly, but we do intend that this webinar is the first in probably what will be a series over the coming months. Obviously, much is changing quickly, as evidenced by the fact that we got new information 3 minutes before we started today. So as there are substantive updates on either of these issues or other legislative issues, we will plan additional webinars, and we will make sure to invite you all. So stay on our email list and we will keep you posted. So thanks again for joining us this morning, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.